Hello everyone, welcome back. So in the last episode, we were able to set up our socket service and we ensured that the connection was successful by console logging the data information we sent from our postman. And moving on today, we are going to set up a simple app that allows us to send message between two logged in users. So this is going to be simple in such that we are just going to have the user enter a name and the login, and from there they can start chatting with each other. So back to our app.js. So initially we had some content to add numbers together. However, I've removed those and we currently have a blank screen. So what we are going to do now is we are going to start setting up our interface for the simple login as well as chatting system. So this will be more like a structure to the intended chat system we want to have. So let's see how this plays out. So let's get into it. So first we would import React as usual. And also by now you notice that we need to make use of use state and use effects. Okay, so let's do that. Use state. Alright, so I'm also bringing in the context, use context. I think so far we've not actually explored how to use context. What we've done so far is setting up our state management and seeing it work. But to actually use it itself, then we want to have use context here. So this now allows us to send in information to our state or retrieve information from our state. So we're going to use all those. Then let's create our components. Alright, so we have a structure here already, and within this structure there is a int text saying hello there, enter your name. So it's prompting you to enter your name. And from there we created a form. So the whole idea of creating a form here is such that when you enter value within the input field, then clicking your enter button should be able to submit, irrespective of you clicking on the button. Then also we have the button itself that allows you to submit your information. And let's run our server to actually see how this works. So for now, this will not actually work because we've not exported it. So let's quickly do that. Alright, so we've done that now and let's start our server. Alright, so here is what we have after running our server. Hello there, please enter your name. So let me zoom in. And from here you can enter your name and you submit. So the idea is that as soon as you enter your name and you submit, you get the message interface where you can now send message between each other. So let's quickly draft that out as well. So let's create that in a separate component so that we can further explore how to make use of our props. So let's do that. Alright, so this is a separate component for our message interface. So since the component, we can as well just make this a capital letter. And yeah, from what we can see here, we are not using the open and close brackets. So it's possible if you just have one parameter you are taking, but if it's multiple, then you have to put in your open and close brackets. It's just a shorthand. Alright, so the next thing we want to do here is to create the simple message interface we are going to get as soon as you enter your name. Alright, so here is the message interface, and what we have here is just a quick snippet of what we are going to have. So within the message interface, we are going to have a username, the username the user has specified, hello the username. Then we are going to have a text area that holds the message the user is going to send. Then a button send to send message. So since this is within a form, you can as well just send it with a click of enter button. Then there is this interface that's going to hold your messages. Currently, it's going to show no messages yet. So let's just quickly put this here so that we can as well, so that we can at least see how it's going to look. So let's have the message interface rendered under here. Alright, so after including this and checking our server, we now have this. So we are not really concerned with any design here. We just want to ensure that the whole system is working. And by the way, the moment you enter your name, the first part of it will totally not be available. We will only have the second part that contains your name. So we are literally done with the kind of UI setup we want to have here. So let's quickly go on with the functionality. So let's define a variable to hold our input, the value for the name. Alright, so here is the variable for our name, and yeah, we've already introduced this. So we have the name variable itself, and we have the setter, then we have the initial value. So we're using the useState hooks here. So the next thing we want to do is to fill in the necessary value to our input field. So let's do that. Alright, so within our input field, we've slotted the necessary value. So for the value, we slot in the name variable. So as soon as we change that, it's going to update our input. Then on our onChange function, we were able to get the event that triggers whenever we change. And that event contains the target and the value that we've changed to. So that value is what we are updating our name with. So we're using the set name to update the value. So next, we need to change this button type to submit if that's not what it does by default, because we want to be able to use our enter button to just submit whatever we've entered. So let's do that. Alright, that has been changed. Now we actually won't be submitting using the button. Instead, we are going to submit using the form. That's how submit actually works. You submit the form and not the button. Alright, so for the onSubmit on our form, we are going to reference a function here which we are going to define by the way. We've not defined that yet. So let's quickly do that. Alright, so whenever you submit a form, it comes with an event. So this event contains a lot of things you can do, such as the data and some other things. But one of the most important things we actually need from this event is to prevent the default action. So by default, when you submit a form, it tends to reload your page, posting the data you've entered. However, we don't want that to be the regular operation. So what we can do here is we can just say e.prevent default. Alright, so we are telling it to prevent the default functionalities. That's going to be a function. So it's going to prevent the default functionality of submitting our contents. So it's not going to submit, but do whatever we want at this point. So the next thing we want to do here is to create a reducer for our user name, such that we can now send the name we've created here to our store. So that way, every other component that wants to make use of it can just make use of it. Alright, so let's go ahead to do that. So we'll go back to the state management under our reducers. So currently we have chart states, which is going to be used later on for our service. But for now, let's create a different state and reducer for our user. Alright, so here is the state for the user detail. So here is the name of the function user detail state, and here is the state itself. So on a normal note, we are meant to have this as an object, such that we can now update it with different detail. But for now, based on what we've set up within our app.js, it's going to be a string. So we can as well just have that, right? So let's move on. So let's create the reducer now. Alright, so for our reducer, we are going to require an action type, which we've not created yet. So let's go back to the actions and do that. Alright, so like I've said before, you want to have a naming convention such that it rhymes with what you are doing. So here we have update chart action, update chart state, update chart reducer. So for our user detail action tool, I think you can see the pattern here. User detail state, user detail reducer. So that way you can always monitor how things are unfolding. So now we can now compare our action. Actually forgot to put the necessary parameter and make it a function here. So state, then action. So then we can compare the action.type is equivalent to user detail action. And yeah, literally we just want to do what this is doing, except that we are going to change the variable we are updating. So this time around we are updating the user detail variable, and that's what we have. So now we've set up the reducer. All we need to do now is go to the store and register all these things we've set up. So let's import both the state and the reducer. Alright, so we have those imported here, and now we can as well update them as well. So here we currently have update chart reducer. Let's include the user detail reducer as well. So that's the whole essence of having this combined reducer, so that we can have multiple reducer in place. Then also the state, we can have multiple states in place. Alright, so let's include the state as well, the user detail state. Alright, and that's all we need to do to have our reducer updated. So that's updated now. So the next thing we want to do is to go back to our app.js. So whenever we submit, we want to post our current name to the store, then move on to the user interface. So at that time, we are aware that the username exists. Okay, so let's do that. So first thing first, we want to get some information within our use context. So let's have it as const. So the use context is more like an object that contains some parameters. So instead of using the square brackets, we are going to use the braces because we are trying to get some information from an object. However, to make it an object, you have to reference the store itself. So it's going to be use context. Then you are going to pass in your store into it. And yeah, so this store is coming from your state management. The store you exported from here is what you're actually importing here. Okay, now we have two main information from this store, and if we go back to the store, yeah, these are the information. So we have the state, which includes all the data in our store, and we have the dispatch, like I said, is used to update our store. So for now, what we need from the store is just the dispatch, because we want to just update the store. We are not getting any information from the store at this point. However, we're going to get an information from the store here over the message interface. Alright, so let's just bring out the dispatch. So again, this is more like deconstructing an object. So since we now have the dispatch is a function that takes in the type of the action we want to perform and the payload we want to update it with. Alright, so within here we want to have the dispatch. Then it's a function that takes in an object. So the first part of the object is the type, and the type is the user detail action. That's the type of action you want to perform. Then the payload. So if you go back to the reducer, you can now see how all this forms. So we sent in the type, which is what we just put in now. Then also we sent in the payload, which we want to put in now. And the payload we are putting in is the name. So with this information, it's going to update our user detail with the payload we've sent in, and it's also going to update the state itself. So that's how actually to send in information to our store using the use context route, oops. Alright. So after doing this, the next thing we want to do is to change our state. So we need a variable to control that as well. So let's have const. Alright, so we've defined a new variable and it's named show message, and by default it's set to false. So what happens here is this is what controls what is shown. So it's either you show the enter username or you show the message interface itself. So for now it's going to be false. But as soon as we dispatch the name of our user, we are going to set this to true so that we can move on to the message interface. So let's adjust this a little bit. So let's bring this outside here. And let's put all this within a branch, an empty branch actually. So remember, we can have an empty branch within React. So an empty branch, I mean, here is a tag without any tag information at all. Alright, so we want to do some things. We want to check. So if the show message variable is false, that's when we want to show the user to enter its name. But as soon as we have the message, as soon as we've dispatched the username, then we want to set this to true and we want to show the message interface. Alright, so most of the time within your GSS, so this part is probably the GSS because it's the part that contains the HTML content. You want to employ the use of ternary operators as opposed to your usual if then else statement. Alright, so the ternary operation is quite straightforward. So you have your condition, which we have here. So the condition here is if it's not show message, and that is if show message is false, which by default is what we have here. Then we have the question mark that says do something. So if it's not show message, then it shows something, which is what we have here. And if show message is true, then it shows the message interface. So the then is more like this colon here. Okay, so that's just the simple basis for ternary operation. Alright, so next, when we've dispatched the name, we want to set the show message variable to true. Alright, so if we go back to our browser and reload, we have this. Now if we enter a name, so let's just use Femi, and we click on submit. As you can see, our information gets updated and we get to see the message UI itself. Okay. So for now, we've not updated with the name we've sent, but we will do that now. So let's quickly get back to the message interface UI. By the way, as you can see, we just have 48 lines of code. But as soon as you realize it's getting quite much, it's just better to segregate things. That's why it's components actually, so that you can segregate things and make your code cleaner. Alright, so again, we are going to make use of the context. So before that, let's have a variable for our name. So let's just copy the name variable we have here. So like this. Now we are going to make use of the use effect hook. And the use effect hook, like I explained in the last episode, it's called based on effectors. And if there is no effector, then nothing happens. But here we are going to have some effector actually. So use effects. So like I said, it takes in a function, then the effectors. So this is a function, and this is going to hold the effectors. Alright, so the effector we want to actually take note of here is the states. So we are copying the use context dispatch information, but this time around we want to change this to states. Alright, and now after changing this to states, we want to get some information from the state, because if we go back to the store, the state is actually a giant object and is going to contain all the key to our variables. So we want to get some information from the state, and the information we actually just need here is the user state, or whatever we've defined the name to be here. So it's user detail. Let's copy this. So again, this is an example of the construction. So the state is an object and you need a particular data from it, a particular key, and that key is what you are deconstructing here. Alright, so why are we actually bringing this out? Okay, so the reason why we are bringing this out is there is possibility that as soon as we dispatch here and we show message, there is possibility, it's not as if it's constant, that the name has not actually gotten to this point. So we can't just get the state information and start using. So we want to ensure that the name has actually gotten here. So what we can do is we can have the user detail be an effector. So what we are trying to do here is, if the user detail is an effector, then we want to check if the content within the user detail is the same as the user state. Okay? So that's what we want to do. So if name is equivalent to user detail, actually if name is not, so that is if what we currently have in this place is not what we have on our user detail. So if we go back to the user detail, we have an empty string, which is actually what we have here. So if the user detail is actually still an empty string, then we don't want to bother setting any states. But we want to listen for any changes that happens on the user detail variable coming from the store. And so we are checking if the name is not equivalent to what we have on our state here, then we want to update our states. So I think that is actually what we are meant to do. So we can update our state by setting state. Set name. And so we want to update our name, the local variable here, with the user detail. Alright, so that's all we are going to do. And next we can now have the username placeholder here replaced with the original name. Alright, so if we go back to our browser, okay, we have an issue. Expected an assignment or a function, for instance, saw an expression. Alright, so that's line 44. So let's trace that out. Alright, so we made use of the wrong content here. So it should be the brace and not the square brackets. Alright, so everything is back to normal. Now if we enter our name, Femi again, I will take enter because we use the form. Right, so we got an error. So we cannot read property user detail of undefined. Right, so let's try and trace this issue. So from what we can see here, it looks like we couldn't get information from the states. And that's absurd. Alright guys, so yeah, we had some issues. As you can see, whenever we try to send information to our state, it tends not to get updated for some reason. So after tracing back to some of the steps in creating this, I realized that we actually made some error here. And actually, what we did here is we had an arrow. We don't need to have a brace again to return something else. So we can just have this as this. So it means now we are returning the new reducers, and that was the error we had. So I've cross-checked this and I saw that that's all we need to remove to make things work. Alright, so back to where we were. So I'll return this back to its usual form, then try to deconstruct the user detail from it. And with that we should be okay. So let's check it out again. So let's have Femi. Alright, so hello Femi. Then you can now start typing your message here and you can send as well. Alright, so that's the plan there. So let's try to send message and we can move on. So I would assume that there is another person with the name Shola. Then I would send a message to that person, and by default the message should show here as well as show at that person's side as well. So let's get onto that. So in order to achieve that, let's just have a separate variable to handle our message list. So const. Alright, so here is the variable for our messages. So in this case, it's going to have an empty list by default. So what we can just check out here, we can have a BR first. Then we can check if the message list is empty. Then we can have the no message, and else we can just look through it to print out the message. Alright, so let's do that. So whenever you want to have an interaction with your variables within the GSS part, then you have to put it within a brace. So we can now say if messages ternary operation dot length is less than 1, so that means the length is 0. Then we want to return that we don't have any message. Else we want to just look through the message, and we can do that with using map. So messages dot map. So map is one of the ESC's latest syntax, and yeah, it's related to what we have as reduce here. So we have map, we have filter and others. So whenever we think, so for those of us who doesn't really have a better knowledge of it, we can just go back to check them out whenever we are free. Alright, so within map we have access to two main things, the index and the object itself. So the individual object within the list. So the object comes first, so let me just call that item. Then the index comes second. Then we can have a arrow key, then that returns some information. Alright, so this even leads me back to this place. So if we want to have the brace here, then we can introduce return here. So that's the mistake there. So if we insisted on having the brace here, then we have to include the return here. And if we just want to return directly, then we just remove the braces and remove the return. So both still going to work. Alright, so we are mapping through our messages here. Then we can just return some information. So I'll return the message as so. So the idea is that within this message list, it's going to contain objects of the message and the sender. So kind of that way. So that means for this item now, the item contains an object, or actually the item is an object that contains the message and the sender. So we can have it as, so h4 we hold the message, so item dot message. Then we can have a small, so let's put this within a branch. All right, so we have the item message, then we have a small tag that holds the sender, so item dot sender. All right. Okay, so since you are mapping through messages, you are going to need to specify a key for individual item, and you can as well just use the index for that, since the index will be unique by the way. Right, so that's all we need to do here. And if we go back, okay, there is an issue. Expected an assignment function for and so is okay. We've made an error. So numbers line 62. Okay, we need to return. So again, that was what I referenced at the start the other time. So far you are using the brace here, then you have to return the content. Alright, so we have this. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we want to send in the message. Okay, currently we've not done that. So first thing first, let's change the button type to submit. Then the form itself, we can track the submit function. And let's just call this submit. So we are going to create the function for submit now. Again, it's going to take the event, and we want to prevent the event's default functionality. Alright, so we've done this. So the next thing we want to do is we want to also create variable for our message, because currently we can't actually type in our message box. So let's do that. So initially 2 is going to have the empty string. So let's update this. Value equals to message. Then the unchanged event, we take in the event, then we want to set message into event.target.value. Right, so that's all we need to do here. And as soon as we submit, we should get our message information. So let's have the structure of the data we intend to send in. So whenever we submit the data structure we want to have, we include the sender, which is the name, and the message, which you don't really need to start referencing, because if you specify the message alone like we have, so if you specify the variable name, it's going to create both the key and the value. So it's going to be key message, then value message. So this is just a shorten from that. So let's console log this to be sure that we actually got here. So console log data, and we didn't define data, so that's going to be an error. So let's call this val. No, not val like that. Let data equals to this. Alright, so let's check it out again. Test. No message yet. So let's type in now. Alright, so we got the information we need to send across. Alright, so this is the sender. So we need to also specify the receiver. So yeah, I think the receiver I would also put a separate input box to enter the name of the receiver I want to send it to, so that we can as well monitor that. So let me create a separate variable. And by the way, when you realize you are getting this much variable, it makes sense to just have a single object that you can update based on a key. But for testing sake, let's just continue creating that. So receiver, set receiver. Yeah, and that's going to be a string as well. So let's create an input field. Alright, so just like we have within our test area, it's almost the same thing. We just have to replace the variables. So here is receivers, and now we need to update the receiver part as well. So receiver becomes receiver as well, just like we did for message. So again, let's confirm that this is working before we move on to the next stage. Oh, okay. So let's adjust this a little. So we're really not designing anything. So with an inclusion of some BR, we should have things formatted well. So as you can see, so this is receiver. Okay, let's have some placeholder to tell us what we're trying to do. So placeholder. Alright, so I introduced some placeholder for both the receiver inputs as well as the test area inputs so that we can know what we are trying to actually do. So test, yeah, so enter receiver name. So we can just say maybe Pius, or let's say Steve. Then we can send a message, test message. Right, so let's send now. Alright, so this is the structure we want. So message, test message, receiver, Steve, then sender, test. And everything seems set. Okay? So what we can actually do here is we can push this message to our message list, since we are the one sending the message, and it's going to render here while also sending the message using our socket service. So remember, if we go back to our socket service, we have this send socket function here. So all this do is it takes in the data and send it. So from what it looks like now, the structure we have is really not meeting what we want. So this is what we want. So we can just replace this. Let's create a separate function to undo what we have currently. So send test socket. So let's call that. And instead of trying to reference each data here, let's just send in the data as it is. Alright. Now we've updated that, so we can go back to the app. So first thing first, let's push in this information. So to do that, we can as well just have set messages, and it's going to be an array. So messages is an array. So it's going to be an array of the existing data, which is messages, if there is an existing data, but we are not concerned about that. Alright, so let me quickly introduce what we try to do here. So we have an array. So messages is an array as well. So we try to spread the data within messages, and what that does, it makes it mimic the array form. So more like just putting the content, the message content within messages inside this new array. Then we can now append our new data, which is the data here. Alright, so now we've been able to update data. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to actually send this as a socket service. Okay. Alright, so let's come down here. So send test sockets, which we have not imported. So let's try and get access to this. Oh, actually, we didn't export this, so I think that's the reason why the editor is not getting access to it. So let's try and import it now. Import. Oh, okay, they're actually in the same location. Socket service, then send test socket. So this is what we need. You can just come down here and send in the data. All right, and with this, we've been able to send the socket service, send the socket system. So let's try and remove every console we have. So let's see console. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any console from here. Okay, yeah, we have one here. Alright, the reason why I'm removing that is if we go back to the socket service, you see that we are console logging some information whenever we hit the socket service. So if we send a message, we should actually get it console logged again. Okay, so let's see it work. So let's enter our name and let's type in some messages. Paul, so that's the receiver name I'm going to use. and the message itself, let's just say testing socket service. Alright, so let's send. Alright, so as you can see, we got the message templates here. Okay, this needs some designing, but yeah, so that's it. And from here, as you can see, this is the information the socket service sends, as you can see. So we can let's adjust this a little. That doesn't look too good. So let's change this to a B instead of H4. So that makes it tick. And let's have a BR. So let's see how that forms. So Paul, Steve. Alright, I think this is okay. Alright, so that we can have space between the next line content. So let's have an horizontal rule, HR. Let's see how that actually forms. So once more, let's test this. Testing to Stella. Right. Okay, so here is what we have. Alright, then enough of this. Let's try and reference the socket system. So whenever we send message like this, we can just update the. So currently we don't have the what do we call it, the reducer to handle this. What the reducer we have currently is to just update that we have a chat, but not to send the chat information itself. So let's try and do that so that we can always see whenever we have any chat information. So back to our reducer, let's have a different state. Export active chat state. Alright, so yeah, there is another state, and I'm setting the initial value to be null. So the way this is going to work is whenever we have a new data, we are going to update this, and as soon as we are done using the data, we're going to return this to being null. Okay, so let's go back to the next stage. So now let's create a reducer for this. So export. So I'll just copy the content within our existing reducer and just change whatever needs to be changed. Alright, so let's create an action for this. Alright, so there is the action. Let's import it here and update accordingly. Alright, so the action here would be active chat action, and the variable here would be, okay, let's change this to variable. Okay, so this changes to active chat, and that should do it. So back to the store, let's include all this. So I've imported both the active chat reducer and the active chat state. So again, let's include them in the necessary slots. Alright, so all these are done, and we have that within our reducer. Okay, so if we go back to the socket service, we can now access since it's a component too, we can make use of our use context here. Use context, we can access the dispatch, then we can access the store. Okay, then whenever we get any data, we just want to dispatch the data using the active chat action. So let's do that. Dispatch. So the type is going to be the active chat action, then the payload is going to be the data. And yeah, how do we now interact with all this? So if we go back to the app, if we go back to our messaging app itself, so this messaging interface, then we can now try to listen to a different state. So yeah, so this is the state, the active chat state. So currently we are listening to the user detail, so we want to listen to the active chat state now. So remember, the active chat state is always what we call it null. So what we can do is if active chat state, so the active chat itself. So if it's not null, we can just have if active chat. We don't need to specify if it's not null. Then we want to do some things. So we want to check if the data, if the receiver is us. So if the receiver is the person at this the client at this particular point, then we want to push in the message. And if not, we can just ignore it. We can do the check here, or we can decide to do the check on the socket service. Actually, I think we should do the check on the socket service. So let's just push the data we have here. So we can just have, so if there is an active chat, then we can just say set messages rather, equals to the existing messages like we used to do, then the new message, which is the active chat. And as soon as we are done with that, we need to dispatch the active chat action to the node. So that was what I mentioned. So we need to import and to reference the dispatch from here. And that's what we want to do. So dispatch. So the type is going to be active chat action, and the payload is going to be null. So that way we won't be able to even interact with this again. And that's all we need to do here. So let's go back to the socket service and actually check. So we can say, okay, if we are going to check here, that means we need access to the state as well, so that we can get the currently logged in user. So that's the name we want to use. So we can say states, then we need the user detail from the states. And yeah, we can check. So if the user detail, which is going to be the user name logged in, is not equivalent actually. It's not equivalent to the data dot the receiver, because we want to add a receiver, then we just want to return. We want to ignore the socket service. We want to ignore the command. Okay. And if the user detail is actually the name, then we can proceed to dispatch the data. Okay, so to make this, maybe for instance, we want to, because currently now this will be case sensitive. So if someone is Paul with capital letter P, then Paul with small letter P will not be valid. So instead, we can just make this a, what do we call it? A lowercase check, but let's just work with this. So we can do all those ones later on in the future. And I believe with all this, everything should work. So let's check this out. Oh, okay, active chat is not defined app.js. So let's try and see what's going on here. So line 52. Oh, okay, so we need to reference this. So comma this. So because all these data are within this state, so we can just get access to them. Alright, so we are back here. So to actually see this action, let's open a couple of more tabs. So let's open another incognito. Let me shrink the screen. So we have another one here. So let's shrink this as well. So we have another here. So let's create one more. And we have the last one at the center. Alright, so let's access the localhost for each. Alright, so I will enter Paul for the first one. So here is Paul. I will enter Ellen for the second one. Here is Ellen. And I will enter Steve for the last one. Here is Steve. Alright, so I want to send message to Ellen. Let's see how that works. So testing Ellen. Okay. So I'm expecting a reaction from here, which I'm not getting. Alright, so it looks like there's still some checks to be done. Okay, so going back to this, let's open the socket and see what we have. Let's see if the socket actually reached everybody. So console.log data, and let's see the reason why it's actually not working. Okay. Alright, so let me just start with the first two. So Paul and Ellen. So let me open the console for this as well. Right, so receiver name is Ellen, then text Ellen. Oh, actually it got here, as you can see, but for some reason it looks like we are unable to get the message to show here. Alright, so let's trace this out and see how to resolve this. Oh, actually I forgot I was calling this setup socket from a use effect. So what makes sense is to have the user detail as an effector here, and that way we can always check what has changed. Okay, so I think this is really not necessary, and the use state at this point might not be necessary as well. So let's remove this. Then we can go back to using the user detail. Alright, so let's check once more. So Paul, Ellen, so hello Ellen. Okay, I think that works now. Alright, so let's clear some of the content we have here and just test this around and see how well it works. Okay, so this is going to be Paul, and this guy is going to be Ellen, and finally Steve. Okay, so let's test Ellen. Hello Ellen. So Ellen received the message while Steve did not, because the message was meant for Ellen. So let me test Paul from Steve. How do you do? And as you can see, Steve gets the message, so Steve can reply Paul. So let me reply Paul now. Let me reply Steve. And did you see Ellen? Okay, so that's literally the basics, and yeah, in the next episode we would work on the UI for the chat app. And since we already have the mechanics working, all we just have to do is to make it fine and integrate what we have so far. So yeah, this took quite a lot of time, and I actually didn't intend to break it up, so bear with me. And if there's any issue in it, let me know in the comment below. Alright guys, see you in the next episode.